Hey, welcome to the Commerce Hero Show. I'm Kalen, and I'm joined today by two very special guests. We've got Eric Heilman of MageMojo, Magento hosting company. Eric, obviously the founder, co-founder, and CEO, whatever your title is these days. And we've got Jay Smith with a Webscale, the founder and CTO. And how you guys doing here today?
Great.
Good.
Sweet. So we're going to, I believe the way this got started is that we had a Mage Talk episode, and I think it was Sunil from Webscale that posted a comment and said, "Hey, says, why don't we just get us both on here and chat through how you guys approach cloud hosting for Magento. There's some specific issues and common snags that people run into." So let's just kind of dig into it. This is sort of the second one of these we've done with two kind of competing companies, and the last one being Oro and Magento. That one got a little off the rails, admittedly. So we're gonna keep it, I think, more cordial. But I think it's interesting content because it allows you to really just kind of jump into the meat of things. You guys both know what you're doing, and so we'll have a kind of a wide-ranging audience, from people that are not super technical to people that are more technical. We'll probably dive into the weeds a little bit on some specific technical questions, and then I'll play the part of kind of asking the dumb questions and the high level questions and things like that non-technical people might be asking. So maybe to start it off, like, one of the questions I got is like, hey, I do my own Amazon stuff, whether I'm an agent, I work for an agency, or I work with a merchant. And by the way, I goes without saying, but if you're in the live chat, feel free to chime in with questions. We'll try to get them all answered. Thanks everybody for tuning in. But so if I'm kind of DIY doing AWS or Google Cloud, what's the value prop that you guys provide as cloud vendors? Because a lot of these things, people can go and get to the infrastructure themselves. A lot of people say, hey, AWS is easy. Like, it's all there for you, right? So let's start off with you, Jay. and what's kind of your value prop to people that say, hey, why shouldn't I just do this myself?
Definitely. So I think that question really depends on your context and where you're coming from. So what I find in North America is very different from our India customers. So I'll start with kind of India. So at our core, at our heart, we're a SaaS offering that focuses on performance and availability, security. Predominantly, those three legs are the pinnacle. That's what we do, right? And how you get there depends, right, on what the backend's doing, where it's hosted, how it's run. In India, what we find is that our India customers are more likely to have a large collection of people. They've got lots of labor available to them. The labor market there is such that it's favorable to the employer. So what they end up with is a significant body of engineers that are trained, they do DevOps, they run the show themselves. They may be overspending some or not as efficient, but it works and they're happy with it. And so they're more likely to run, their application in probably the Mumbai data center in AWS India. And then when we get involved is that they've had some challenges around security. So bots are a big deal. All the things that they can't deal with in program time that a person couldn't solve. That's where they're looking at us to solve those security issues and shared challenges, to help them, optimize and automate the inclusion of CDN in their delivery, so improve their performance. That's kind of one view where it's more us as SaaS offering doing what we do and allowing the customer to, they'll actually manage and operate their own cloud account on their own just fine. In North America, it's kind of the opposite dynamic, where the labor market is actually much more expensive, restrictive. And so what we find here is that they can't find the people, they can't afford the people that they need to be able to operate those sites, right? And so they're looking at us more as what you might consider a traditional hosting vendor, where they're wanting our control platform to do more control, manage the firewalls, manage the application cluster, and actually provide them auto scaling. And I think, in that sense, both of us, I know that the MageMojo guys focus here too, where our focus is in e-commerce and that vertical and the challenges that are specific to that. Whereas the cloud provider tools, be it Google, Amazon, CenturyLink, I don't care who the cloud provider is, they tend to have a more generic approach where it's the slow growth strategy, or apply their tools to a wide range. They can't focus on a specific vertical. So their security offerings, they can't deal with the 0-day attacks on a Magento site, whereas our focus very much is around we have 70% of our customer base is Magento. We're flexible. We have WooCommerce and others too. And then we've also seen customers migrate where they want to keep us, but they'll switch to a Rails app, or, they make decisions for whatever reason. So we try to meet them where they're at. But in that context, I think, they still have that challenge. They know their development, they know their market and what they want. What they don't necessarily have the ability to do is operate their system. They don't have the DevOps skill in-house, or they can't afford it either. So.
So the cost really for this expertise and talent is still not at all cheap. Eric, what are your thoughts on this topic?
Well, we're taking a little bit of a different approach. Our approach is that you don't have to worry about any of it anymore. We just want it to work. We want it to always be there, available, and scaling for any traffic patterns that you need. And then we just bill you based on Google user sessions. So we've simplified the billing. We've simplified all the configurations. We just handle that for you. And then that allows us, since we only focus in Magento, it allows us to go deeper into our support as well. So what we find is that a lot of people, even though they may have staff and they may have developers who know Magento really, really well, they get into a lot of situations where they don't understand certain performance characteristics about the application, how it interacts with the hosting. We see that a lot, in particular in the database area. I think the being able to write queries through the Zen engine has abstracted so much away from developers that they no longer understand anything about how to optimize a query, or what the query is even doing, or full table scans and indexes. So that's where we come in and really profile the code, and we'll tell you it's this file, it's this line number, this is why you're having these problems, here's what you can do to speed it up. And then we abstract a lot of that infrastructure away so that you don't have to worry about configurations or things. Kaylin, should I answer Joel's question that I just saw pop up? Or should we save them?
I caught that question, so I'll save it and put it into the flow here. So just on this question of how let's maybe dive into example, because you guys both mentioned some examples of hey, you hit with a 0-day exploit, or you're really running into some performance issues that maybe your developers aren't familiar with. What are some examples? Let's say I'm a merchant. Let's say I have an in-house developer who's a solid developer, knows Magento, and maybe we're thinking about just rolling our own AWS infrastructure. What's an example of a scenario where that you've seen in the past in your own support that this is something you're probably going to hit a wall on? And maybe we could just kind of flesh that out and see how you guys approach that. So maybe Eric, if you want to, you already kind of started, but if you want to just flesh something like that out.
Yeah, that kind of goes into Joel's question. So to wrap up the previous question, we have the 15-minute support SLA. So we're here 24/7, 365. We'll be on your ticket within 15 minutes, and we're working to help you understand Magento and the problems that you're having. Now, where that doesn't make sense for people is when they want to do really custom things and they want to have control over the infrastructure. So what we're building is what we think is best for 80% of the Magento users. But Joel's question, if you want a custom VPN and you want to come in and start setting up custom services, you want control over all your configurations, you want basically root access to do whatever you want to do, we don't do that at all. So if you want a custom VPN, we would say, no, that's not right. So if you have a lot of requirements like that, we would say, no, we're not the right provider for you. Whereas, Jay and those guys probably would be better suited in that area.
Okay. So Joel's question was, hey, what if I need a custom VPN connection to an internal organizational internal system for an ERP integration, as an example? And I guess what I wonder there, Eric, is for you think about the debate with hey, you go with a Shopify, it's out of the box, you can't customize it. You go with a Magento, if anything comes up, you can always there's always a way to work around and find a solution. It might be expensive, might require custom development, but there's always a way. It's sort of one of the
We
key.
would say SSH tunnel, use an SSH tunnel. And we have documents on how to set up an SSH tunnel, keep it alive, and use it that way. So it's not to say that you can't do those same things. It's to say that we have procedures and rails to do them versus letting you do your own BIOS and, you know, custom routes and, you know, between your own VPCs and.
Gotcha. So there is a way to do it. There is a way to do it with a custom SSH tunnel? Then?
Yeah.
Yes and no. But sometimes companies have a legal department where they have a requirement where they can't do it. Like I've seen crazy shit written in people's bylaws that say how they're supposed to do something and whether it makes sense or not. That's the way they've always done it. So sorry, Jay, go ahead.
No, sorry, Eric. Yeah, I think what we encounter is that when we deal with the bigger public companies, that's where we don't have the latitude to just mandate or to say, hey, you know, you have to do it this way or that way. Regardless of our opinion of the technology choice they've made, we really find that, you know, I mean, yeah, that public company, you've got the parent company of the e-commerce vendor that you're working with that's saying, no, our security rules say it needs to operate this way. And so as a result of that, you know, you just have to meet them where they're at, you know, it's your customer. And yeah, and to Eric's point, I mean, that's where it can get to be if, you know, there are boundaries there. We find that, you know, our boundaries are pretty flexible. You know, if you get into that situation where, yeah, the VPNs, we have a number of those where you've got that need to use a VPN solution to connect the home office of the public company to their cloud operations because ERP is running one place and the e-commerce is running in a different place. I mean, yeah, that's kind of normal for us. We see that not with everybody, but with certainly the bigger customers. They'll make those demands, and we're happy to meet them and deliver for them.
Right. And so then, Jay, kind of going back to that question of what's an example of something, if a merchant says, hey, I want to do my own AWS, I don't want to use a vendor, what's kind of an example of something that even if they have developers in-house, that they might run into a wall, there might be some level of complexity with AWS, with performance, with security, like what's maybe if we could flesh something out a little bit. And also while you're in there, Eric mentioned SLAs. I'd be curious to know what your guys' SLA is.
Sure. So there's multiple things in there. So it's all right. So let's talk about, well, the SLA is easy. Yeah, we provide an SLA to critical tickets. Our actual responsiveness is much faster than that. The SLA is a legal term. When critical issues occur, typically we're the ones seeing the critical issue first. There are those business issues that come up where, you know, they have some content that they want to change. There's nothing wrong with the site. They have some content they recognize they don't like, and so then they have a need to make a change, publish it. That's different. You know, that's a customer-driven example. Happy to, you know, we are very responsive in working with our customers. Then to the flip side, there was kind of two questions. I think we started on a security question, which was sort of what kind of security issues and challenges, walls that people might see. And then there's also that sort of AWS, right? Somebody wants to operate AWS. Yeah. These days, so when we first started this, we were taking business away from Pure One, from, you know, Zero Lag, now Total Server Solutions, where it was hardware to the cloud. So we're making that initial cloud migration. Right. One of the things, I think if you do that piecemeal, so if you do it by hand, it doesn't work. You're challenged, and I think this is probably, I think we've all won business from Magento Cloud's challenges around onboarding, that they don't have a systemic approach to how to import a customer into their offering. And as a result, you know, you can see this frustration where, you know, yeah, the flexibility that you mentioned about Magento, what makes it strong and powerful is that the merchant can decide they want their store to run this way. They want these pieces to be a part of their store, how it's going to operate. And then that means you have all these unique snowflakes. And the hardest thing to do is to now provide this systemic, repeatable approach for onboarding that takes all these unique snowflakes, allows them to maintain that flexibility, but then gets them onboarded in a cloud-based architecture that works, that auto-scales, that has the security, that has all the things you want. That's the hardest thing, I think. And when those that translates back now to those individual companies that try to do it. Now what we're seeing is customers that, well, these prospects where they forklifted from their on-prem or in, you know, a Pure One or somebody, they forklifted that into Amazon. Typically it's Amazon, and it's not working. They're having performance challenges. They're having scalability challenges. Nothing's working the way. They're not getting the promise of the cloud, and now they're reaching out saying, hey, we got to do something different. How do we do it? And so that's where we're now migrating. We'll migrate, Amazon to Amazon, where it's, okay, yes, it's your cloud account. You delegated credentials to us. We're then using our approach. So we call it our auto provisioning system, where we essentially create a software declaration that defines the network, the VPC, the firewall rules, how you configure Webscale, what the WAF's going to do, all the application server configuration, database configuration. We input your data, push button, pops out, and then we test it extensively before we get ready to go live. Hand it over to the customer, they test it extensively, or partner, they test, and then get to that place where we know this thing's working on day one. At any rate, when you do that, you have a much more repeatable result for onboarding. And so we know exactly how long it takes us to do every step of the process, how long the customer is going to spend. And typically we're waiting on the customer. They're busy running their business. So yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. And then question from Aviator in the chat. And by the way, Eric, if there is a question that comes up or somebody addresses, actually feel free to just ask it. Maybe just repeat the question so if people are listening by audio, they can catch it. But if you want to reply to something, go for it. But question from Aviator was, are there any cloud demos to test the speed of a site? And so how do you guys approach that? Like, do you guys have benchmarks to compare? Do you guys have benchmarks to kind of compare your systems to other systems? Also, Jay, I don't know if you gave your actual SLA. I was curious. I don't know if that's something you can share or not, but what your actual SLA is. We got that question follow up in the chat.
Oh, sure. For critical ticket, actually, I don't know what it is off the top of my head. I believe it's 15 minutes. It could be 30 though. But it's one of those things that it's good, right? It never comes up. We actually track our responsiveness to every ticket that we receive. We're in it with our customers. Typically, what's happening these days. So I mentioned before that we're a SaaS control platform. So what that means is we're taking a tremendous amount of telemetry data off of the application servers, the data tier, and importing that data comes into our control platform, and then we're making control decisions based on the data that we've collected. So for example, if we detect that the CPUs are overloaded based on the arrivals that we're seeing from a traffic perspective, we scale out the system. Auto scaling is the most obvious place you can see this. In addition to that, we're also pulling out data about slow queries, everything that's going into the system, right? And so it's not uncommon for us to detect an issue before the customers detect an issue. Certainly system level elements, we're detecting that long in advance of our customer. We're informing our customers of challenges that are going on. And then, obviously there's a customer business issue or something that they're dealing with where, they have a problem that's maybe code related content. Site's up and functional, but something about the system's not right, and they're asking us to help facilitate a deploy or what have you.
Right.
And yeah, Joel pointed out in the channel, I think, our SLA is on our website.
Okay.
The most current ones out there, feel free. Awesome. I think he even posted a link to it.
Okay, we'll get somebody pull that up and post it in the chat. And then Eric, if there any of that you wanted to respond to, or just sort of this question around how do you, people that like, listen, I want my site to be fast. Like, how can I compare one solution off of another to know that I'm getting the fastest infrastructure available?
Well, people ask us all the time, can you give us a free demo or anything like that? And we say what we can do is you can sign up. It's only $58 to start. You can sign up online, and we have a 30-day free refund. So we'll migrate a copy of your store. We'll go through our performance testing, tuning, optimizations, and then you can test it. Take it for a test drive.
Apples to apples.
Yeah, I mean, we can set up a demo. Anybody can set up a demo store, and we went through this years ago in the Magento hosting industry, where there was benchmark sites. Ashley Schroeder had one, Mage Speed Test. Ben ran one years ago. and it was just synthetic, fake. Like people were doing all kinds of crazy stuff, like, you know, disabling core modules and tweaking the templates, and I saw some really crazy stuff. So it wasn't apples to apples. The only way to really know is to just make a copy here and look at your old host, and we do have a performance guarantee that we will run your store time to first byte faster than any other provider. So we have a 2.9 release coming out Monday that fixes a lot of the edge cases and performance that we had, and we're seeing 2 to 3 over our MHM servers, which we were already leading in performance. So we'll definitely take that test next week on 2.9 if anybody wants to take the challenge.
Awesome. Next live stream, we'll do a live head-to-head test.
I think your Alan McGregor in your chat actually nailed performance. I mean, every integrator, all of our partners, you know, at 95% of its code. So infrastructure, we can do a lot. We do a lot to help maintain the performance that you've gotten, but really the developers are king here. You know, I sort of view it as one of my tools is to actually provide all the elements that you need to collect the data to actually see where the performance problems are. So our portal actually gives you access to 30 days worth of all your traffic. So every HTTP, HTTPS request you processed over the last 30 days, that metadata is available to you to understand how long every server, what server processed it, what ADC did it come into, how long did it take to process, you know, everything about that request. So you can actually get into, well, what's my actual user experience and where do I improve on that, right? So nice. We can help get you to a Blackfire to go dive into the code and understand how do I improve that page that's impacting my overall user experience. Nice, that's awesome.
So I had a great question from a buddy of mine who's an e-commerce director with kind of a, I'm not sure if you're laughing.
Oh no, I'm laughing at the 2 times slower SLA. I think it's hilarious. Yeah, I don't know. You can talk, I'll talk to the CEO. Maybe we'll change
it. David Gitman is not unbiased, by the way. But yeah, so David pointed out in the chat that the Webscale SLA is 30 minutes. Still a very respectable SLA. And so
what's up with the 5 incidents?
I don't know what that is actually. I think that feels historic. We don't have any kind of, you know, I own the support organization as a job role as part of, they report up to me in addition to product. And so gives me insight into like what the customer experience is and make sure that we're responsive and solving customer problems. I can tell you most of our customers, if you know, what I find is that when customers, like the big, you know, Magento end of lifing 1 and then this switch to 2, and it's some customers I've seen them not, they treat it like it's a minor version upgrade or something, and they're missing the weight of that you're replatforming, and it's a big effort. And so what I've seen is that when you have those big changes in a site, I mean, regardless of what it is, if you're making big changes, there's going to be a lot of back and forth that comes with that. And so typically, you know, yeah, in that, yep, you're going to have critical issues. We're going to be there and beat you. And what we'll actually do is open up a Slack channel in those situations to that customer so that when you're in there where there's issues, you know, if they're going back and forth, we're making sure that we have a conversation going versus, you know, needing to go back and forth and email via tickets. That's not the right approach. I mean, we're all big believers in Slack in here too, I think. So, yeah.
Yeah. Gotcha. So
nice tank top. Yeah.
So question on from a buddy of mine, e-commerce director with a decent sized merchant. And he's saying, look, how do I do an honest evaluation of different hosting offerings? And you know, for somebody that's trying to decide between these things and trying to decide what's the best fit for them, Eric, let's start with you. And just how should they? I mean, obviously, you guys are both biased, as anybody is when it comes to a product that they sell. But how should somebody approach this? How should they kind of cut through all the noise that's out there?
You got to test drive it. You really got to get in there, and what you read on the websites and the SLAs and what people say on these calls, like you got to get in there and test drive it. Just look for people who have that money back guarantee for the first month, and if you don't see it, ask. You know, a lot of people will, and have them, you know, like I know us, I don't know about Webscale, but we do free migration. So we'll have a copy up and ready for you to test within 2 days, usually sooner. And then it's running on our own demo URL. So you can go in, you can test it, you can open tickets with our support, you can, you know, see our support during different times of the day, different reps to talk with, and just test the performance and test the tools, test the panel, see how you like our own control panel, how you manage configurations yourself, and go in and do some things that you normally do, like in the admin, move categories or run a reindex, or, you know, run searches, and really test it out.
Is there a way for a merchant to kind of de-risk that process of testing out a new hosting environment? Because you know, obviously they can set up a test instance and kind of play with it, but like you said, you don't really know what you're dealing with until you're actually dealing with your real site. You've got your real team managing things in the back end and stuff like that. Like, I wonder if there's a best practice around maybe trying to break off a sub segment of your infrastructure that maybe isn't everything or something like how can people kind of de-risk that whole process? Because it seems like most of the time, if somebody's going to switch hosting, they're like, especially if they're a decent sized merchant, they're just going to bite the bullet, pull the plug, move over. And it's kind of this very risky decision.
Yeah, it's jumping off a cliff every time. And,
yeah,
you know, when I see this, I think we talk a lot about the technology. I think everybody likes to focus on the things you can measure and get your hands on it. And I get it, you know, it makes sense. Yeah, you want to understand, I think, for me, it's like how you picture SI, right? So here we are in the Magento community, certainly the mid-market. You typically don't have big development resources in-house. You have somebody who's technically competent, who understands the technology, but then they recognize they need a team that's bigger than them. And so then they go interview system integrators that they can partner with. And that partnership, it's really, everything's great when you first sign up and you first do everything. The world's wonderful, right? It always looks rosy. It's when the problems happen and something doesn't quite go according to plan. Now what? How does that system, how does that team respond? Are you able to work with them, right? So I think that personal aspect of the merchant, you know, who can that merchant work with to get the answers to their questions, get the, you know, the people working on the problems correctly, and then does that vendor, you know, be it a system integrator or, you know, somebody that's helping you facilitate your hosting, are they going to work well with your development organization? And will that collection, I think it's one of the hardest things in the Magento community, is having those three different parties work together in concert. So hosting with the system integrator, with the merchant, making sure that the merchant's needs are getting met and that everybody's working hard to solve that problem directly. I think, you know, it gets overlooked. I think sometimes we do focus a lot on the technology and the performance and the, you know, bits and bytes of it, and miss the human side of it, which is really what matters a lot. Like when you pick up the phone at 3 a.m. in October as you're panicking, getting ready for Black Friday, is there somebody there to answer the phone and help you through whatever situation it is, no matter what the problem may be? So.
Got it. Eric, what do you think about, what's your answer to that one?
Yeah, we do have phone support. I don't know if Webscale, if you guys also have phone support.
Yeah, we do. It's not so much the phone. I think it's more that partnership side that I think, you know, we both recognize there's that need to be that partner with the customer and help them with whatever they're going through.
Yeah, you got to work with them. You got to open up tickets and interact with people, and, you know, talk to your account reps. Our account reps will go through a customer and go through all of their requirements and multiple meetings, and our guys go into all kinds of crazy meetings with customers where they're figuring things out and advising them. And there's a lot of like pre-sales due diligence that we do to make sure that they're right fit and there's no gotchas and all the requirements fit, and it is the best decision. Sometimes it's not, and we'll just straight up tell people like, hey, like, we're not the best host for you. You're not going to have a good experience here. You shouldn't be here. And here's some other people in the industry that we know and we trust, and you should talk to them. They could probably fit you better than we can, because we don't fit everybody.
Nice. Well, speaking of hosting company providers that we wouldn't recommend, we'll talk a little bit about the Magento cloud itself at some point. So we'll get it, actually starting to get some questions about that in the chat. So we'll get into that. Before we do, question from, when I say before we do, I always want to say a word from our sponsor. Question from Casey. Thank you guys for the discussions. When it comes to Magento in a cloudy type environment, is there ever a recommendation or a customer use case that would call for multiple admin instances? Eric, we'll throw that one to you first.
Honestly, I would say no. We get that request a lot, and the only reason I see for it is to separate the admin instance from for resources, for freeing up resources from other web nodes. But the way our system auto scales, there's no need for that. We're going to scale out horizontally as needed, and there is no concept of offloading resources from one web node for the admin. Now we can give custom admin URLs, and we can go out of CloudFront and redirect it and route it differently to get around WAF rules or to do different security permissions, URLs, and things like that. But as far as actually having a separate admin instance and code base, no, not that I know of. Maybe Jay does.
Oh yeah, we get the request a lot too. I think one of the things that's different, I agree with you, it's just web traffic from our point of view. And when you have horizontal scaling, who cares? The one thing that we do, I mean, when a customer does want to route admin, it's usually there's some need, it's about maintaining, maybe they have a large internal support staff that the actual internal users, the admin side, are pretty heavy. At that point, when we do set up a separate admin server, whether it's a dedicated URL, so it's a separate Webscale application, so a domain specific to admin, or it's a path. So one of the things we provide in our web controls, because we're an ADC at heart, we can route different parts of the URL space to different application clusters. So you can use many different clusters to service. So we'll often, the biggest one that I care about is WordPress, obviously. So all these guys have blogs that are, it's often that it's like a blog is a subpart of the URL space, or it's news or something like that, where we're routing that honeypot to its own location to keep it away from the commerce storefront. And it would provide a different set of rules in terms of security to lock it down so that, just try to keep the storefront safe. In terms of admin, if we do run a separate admin cluster, and we always run a cluster, typically it's a cluster of one though. We do that so that if the admin fails, our system detects the failure and replaces the server automatically. So we just keep it going. It doesn't become a user-facing thing or for us. But other than that, yeah, it's possible. I could see it. It's just web traffic too. So if you had a large group of internal resources, that work 9 to 5 and you want to save money, you might have an admin cluster that scales from 1 to some number. So it scales up at the beginning of the day when they come in and start working, and scales back down at the end of the day. I could see it. It's not typical though. Okay. I agree with Eric in that sense that, having a separate cluster, if they really want to segregate that traffic, we support them in that and provide them that cluster of one, but it's really for self-healing purposes as opposed to scale out need.
Okay. And like I promised, I will be asking the dumb questions here. So I had one for you. You've said ADC a couple of times. What does that stand for? Oh,
sorry. Yeah, my networking background. It's an application delivery controller. It's kind of how we started in the world. My background in distributed systems, it's really you think F5, it's a load balancer, but it's cloud-based. So we separate the data plane from the control plane. The data plane's where all your HTTP, HTTPS requests are going. The control plane's making control decisions. So it's reconfiguring it, it's scaling it out, it's scaling the application tier, it's managing the application. So yeah.
Okay, beautiful. And then Jay, we did get a question in the chat on pricing. I don't know if that's something you can share, if you prefer people to contact you guys, but
yeah, feel free to reach out. Pricing that's a sales conversation, the CEO part of the business. I'm the CTO, so I don't really deal with the business side so much, but yeah.
Fair enough.
Keelan, I wanted to touch on the ADC thing, and also which kind of leads into the horizontal auto scaling. I think the approach that our companies take are very different. As Jay's talked a lot about ADC, and Keelan, that link I sent you where I was like 300 pounds before I lost a bunch of weight on F5's website.
Yeah.
So they did a case study on us in 2013. We were using their ADC. We had a large F5 Viprion deployment, and those are ADCs. And we use those, and that's what we're moving away from into Kubernetes and Docker and Kubernetes auto scaling. So now, instead of having like ADC controllers that are managing things in a network, we've broken everything out into more of a service-oriented infrastructure. So Kubernetes now is managing a set of containers instead of like when Jay talks about we have clusters and servers. We don't have any concept of servers anymore. We have containers and services, and those float across a pool of Stratus instances that we maintain, a fleet of instances. And it gets into like how we do auto scaling very, very differently. Whereas we're scaling individual containers like PHP FBM, we'll scale that unlimited horizontally across the fleet of Stratus instances that we maintain, versus actually scaling physical instances. And that model, we have no need for the ADC, which is what we're moving away from.
Awesome. Sorry, I'm getting a little background noise here. I'm not sure if you guys are hearing it here with the kiddos.
No, it sounds
but,
clean.
Can I
cool.
respond?
Please.
I actually think our technologies aren't all that different. I mean, when you talk about Kubernetes, that is your controller. You are doing load balancing. You're distributing to multiple PHP FPMs. You're really talking about granularity. So a container, in that image, that image that you're deploying as a new container, it gives you additional capacity that's somewhat limited in terms of how much additional capacity. So I think probably the biggest difference, we don't have, well, I'm not saying that you're limited in the scale out. We both can do horizontal scaling to any level. No, and that's not what my claim was. It was more just that when I scale, I'm scaling because, I'm in the customer's cloud account and they're paying for virtual machines. There's no physical anything. They're paying for virtual machines. And those virtual machines are participating in the delivery of this site. So we're giving them application capacity. So CPU capacity, it's PHP, so it's CPU bottleneck typically. So we're adding additional CPU capacity. I think for our customers, what we find is that they're so big that when they have those scaling events, their needs are not small. Their needs become big very fast. And actually, the ability to add significant capacity in a very short period of time is what's needed. And I think, the fundamental difference between us, the one thing I do like that about a containerized approach is that, look, if I already have the CPU sitting on the shelf and I could just put a container on there, I could scale in a second. But if I'm running efficiently in that customer's account, and our world is a bit different in that, is that I'm not running them on instances that I own, I'm running them instances in their cloud, and I'm helping them manage their cloud, then I'm adding virtual machines to bring them online in their system to give them capacity, and they need it. And for these applications, right, it's their application running in their cloud. So if they're adding capacity, they want to use all that capacity to service those customers. I think, you mentioned it comes up a lot. I think that's one of the areas that we're different than some of the others. It's not, we're not reactionary in our scale out. We're actually watching how the system's changing and then scaling out ahead of it so that we're keep tracking the compute needs, what they're going to be, not the way they are now, and what they're going to be, and then scaling to meet that demand. So, we both get there, and we just get there in different ways. And I think it's what we were saying about before that, really it comes down to, if what's the right fit, so how we do it might address or be, attuned to certain customer set, and how Eric and those guys do it is attuned to a different customer set. And, we do meet in the middle in some places for sure. But I think, by and large, it's a huge community, and there's a lot of merit to all of the approaches. So anyway,
the pricing I think is very different, because you guys, if you're in the customer's account and you're scaling instances for them, that's a very dynamic pricing cost model. So it's going to go up and down with the instances that they use. Whereas we're saying like Google Analytics session pricing is what you pay. So you only pay per session, per real user in Google Analytics. And what that allows customers to do is to plug that into financial models. And based on their conversion rate, they can say exactly what they're going to pay for infrastructure costs per order. So by abstracting all of that away,
that can get really expensive for a very large site. We range millions of sessions a day to millions of sessions a month. So, when you're in that wide range, basically, if you're pricing based on consumer session, there's no value to optimizing your code to make it more efficient, because the more efficient the code is, the less CPU it requires to deliver that same number of sessions. So I mean,
That's
again,
good.
it's not
Customers
good or
like
bad.
that. Customers like that.
It is good,
They like not having to
that
worry
means
about it.
in my model, their prices went down, but in your model, the price stayed flat. So if I'm helping you get better performance per session, and that leads to more, I mean, you're paying less for that infrastructure. And I think it just comes down to the customer and what speaks to them. I think it's not, I can't say that it's not bad. I mean, user session pricing, it's a good thing. It's a very cloudy way to approach it. It's great. I think ours, where it's tied to, the efficiency of the partner and their code and helping that customer get good use out of their system, that's great too. So, I mean, I can't really, it gets back to that, well, what works for you?
Yeah, this is beautiful. Getting into some nice robust discussion here,
Yeah,
and people that are watching can kind of.
What I like about Webscale though is I saw you guys have multi-cloud. You guys do multi-cloud with 15-minute. You say that the data is no more than 15 minutes out of sync, and you can fail to another cloud within an hour. I think it was. That's really cool. We don't do that.
It's you guys you guys are Amazon, right? I mean, I think
we can spin up and
cloud. It's it makes sense in that regard. I think our focus, we've customers in the EU, they end up with data privacy rules, so we've had those where we've actually even had to adopt some EU specific cloud providers like Cloud Sigma, so they're regional effectively. I think it's interesting because they're a niche provider essentially, that because of where they are, they're able to serve as a customer that AWS and Google and everybody else can't, because of business concerns. It's almost like they've been regulated into existence, which is kind of interesting, but they service that niche. Our tools, I think it gets back to kind of a different approach, I suppose, is that because we're multi-cloud, not everybody supports all the different things. So then I'm forced to do more on our side. Like we want to make sure, we strive to make sure that our auto scaling, our provisioning, everything about what we do, DR, all of it, works the same regardless of what cloud providers you've chosen. So if you want to be in CenturyLink, we'll make auto scaling work, and it does.
Do you guys do a lot of Google Cloud Engine?
We do.
Sorry, Caitlin. We're taking over.
Yeah, no, that's okay. Caitlin, so hey, am I still here? No, I
is this thing on?
It's good you guys are the smart ones in the room. I just wanted to check because if we can go over the hour, we've got a ton of people, we've got a ton of viewers, a ton of questions. That would be great. I just want to time check with both of you guys. Jay, are you able to go over the hour, or do we have a hard stop?
I have a little bit. I have another meeting that I might be able to bump some because I don't think there's another thing after it, but I probably have another 15-20 minutes I could swing.
Okay, so I'll try to. Okay, all right. So I'll try to work through these. We may continue with just Eric if Jay's got to jump off, but so this is somebody in the chat, Mike, his words, not mine, for people that are going to get upset with me. Why does Magento Cloud suck so much? And I asked him for some specifics because you do sometimes hear.
That's why Ben's here. Ben's monitoring. By
the way, shout out to Ben Marks in the room. Love you, brother. And so I asked for some specifics. He mentioned scheduling, running into issues with scheduling, I guess with cron type stuff, Elasticsearch stuff, issues with disappearing products and home pages. And so, or products on the homepage. So what I'm just going to give you guys a chance to share your thoughts on Magento Cloud. What are some of the snags that you guys see people run into with Magento's cloud offering? And how do you guys differentiate? And Eric, we'll start with you.
Oh my God! Did you really want to start with me?
Change your plans. Change your plans. Start with you.
I don't even know where to begin, Keelan. My list of issues of Magento Cloud is so long. I guess at the core, I would say it's not really Magento Cloud. It's platform.sh. And what Magento built on top of it were the deployment tools, which they're now asking the community to build with them. And there's a lot of limitations to platform.sh. For example, Magento put out that 10 new Commerce Cloud features article, which I thought was just terrible marketing fluff. But they talk about things like, oh, we recently upgraded to the new M4 instances. Like, come on, guys. Like, M4 was out before you even released Magento Cloud. You were on C3s. So then they say, like, oh, we doubled the memory. Well, what you did was you went from C, the high compute, which is what Magento really needs, is high CPU frequencies, and you traded that for the M instances. So now you went down in CPU frequency, and you're behind by at least a generation of instances, 2 generations almost now. Amazon just released some new. So it's always delayed. It's always delayed. There's been tons of issues with it. They fixed some. So they have fixed some, like they used to have 3 separate Git repositories for your 3 separate instances. They just recently fixed that after like 2 years. It's just everything is really, really slow, and everything is really, really behind. It doesn't auto scale. People think it auto scales. It doesn't. You're limited to 3 instances. You have to call them. You have to say, hey, I think I'm having an auto scaling event, or they call you.
It's like,
I don't know.
I think I'm pregnant. I think I'm having an auto.
I think I'm having a heart
I feel normal.
No,
I'm sweating uncontrollably.
I mean, you guys, we've all dealt with Magento support on just regular enterprise edition. Can you imagine on the hosting side? Like, there's no
building a support organization is, yeah. I mean, that's really one of the key things that a hosting company provides is that 15-minute, that 30-minute SLA, and that's a very difficult thing for any other type of organization to build. Jay, what are your thoughts? And I'd love to dig into auto scaling specifically. I know we didn't really get into the specifics of how we talked a little bit about that. And that's a big topic. But maybe, if you want to touch on that, or just any other thoughts.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's one of the biggest challenges, right? I know that our own example. So trying to involve people, or trying to have people predict when they need capacity, and then the tougher question, how much they actually need. Doing it by hand just doesn't work. So I'll give you an example. Last Black Friday, I think we handled close to 100 billion HTTP requests that weekend across HTTP, HTTPS, across all our customer base, right? So when we went, the months leading up to that, it's like third quarter, you have that conversation with your merchants. Say, hey, we know Black Friday is going to be a big deal. What do you think, from a marketing standpoint, what do you think you're going to do? How much added traffic, how much are you going to grow over last year? And where do you think your peaks are? And like that. They tell us, they come up with their best estimate, they put their models together. They did that. We did that across the base. We set their min cluster to that and said, all right, fine, we'll set you the min, we'll start there for going into the Black Friday weekend. We'll see what happens. And then we let it go. And we found out that they were wrong by a factor of 3. So we auto-scaled them significantly beyond what they ever thought they could be possible. And what that kind of tells you is 2 things. Capacity planning is hard. And it's really hard because there's this kind of dynamic feedback that happens, that when you're fast and lots of people show up, more people show up. And if you stay fast when more people show up, more people show up. And then you're wildly wrong in terms of your capacity planning needs. It just becomes a very difficult thing to predict. So yeah, auto scaling is huge. If you can't do it, you're not going to survive Black Friday, especially with a brand of note. That's just where it really falls down. And then 2, on top of Black Friday, then you run into, we deal a lot in industries where real world events drive traffic. So companies that sell gold, for example, I think all my gold companies were going off like crazy yesterday, scaling like mad because the market changed.
Did you say gold companies?
Yeah, they sell bullion online. They're Magento storefronts that sell bullion on front. Actually, there's a couple of other platforms in there too. But that industry, right, it's market demand. You can't forecast necessarily when. I mean, they had an insight. They said, oh, we know something's going to happen because the price of gold is fluctuating, and that usually drives traffic. But then they all had big scaling events as a result of that. So if you can't do it in an automated fashion, you're in for trouble. It's going to be a problem.
It's table stakes for.
That's the modern world is. And then 2, you're not even taking into consideration, the viral marketing campaign, where you really want influencer marketing, and the best kind of influencer marketing is happenstance. We've had that too, where Michael Phelps tweets about a product, and then all of a sudden massive sale happens because 1 million people show up. So,
yeah, no, that's good. I wasn't even ready with my next question queued up. Okay, do you guys think that no, this is sort of a bit of a fluff, but do you guys think the Adobe will fix the Magento cloud? They know how to do cloud well. You know, they've got these two sides of their business, right? They've got the creative offering and then the what's it called, experience cloud, and so they do have a level of expertise. We can keep Eric, let's maybe keep our answers short because I sort of know what we're going to say on this, but what are your thoughts on that?
They would have to move away from platform.sh. I don't know what the terms of the agreement are. Can they do that? I don't know. They have to do that before it actually becomes good. And if they can, you know, integrating anything with Adobe is probably at least a year away.
Right.
Yeah.
So this was a question from David. I'm jumping around a little bit, but do I need to pay for the same service year round if most of my business is done, let's say during the holiday season? Jay, maybe you can take that one for merchants that have spiky traffic patterns.
Yeah, sure. So do you have to pay for the same service? I think that's one of the values to auto scaling is allowing you to shrink during the year and then expand during the fourth quarter. I mean, I think it's pretty universal. There's some sub verticals in there that it's different. Lawn mowing equipment and things like that, where it's definitely a spring type deal versus fourth quarter. I do have some that fourth quarter is not interesting to them, but by and large, yeah, fourth quarter is it. As a driver, what I think we find, I mean, we try to structure our terms so you think like data egress and things like that, where you get, you know, your flexibility, you can use it whenever you use it. We don't really care. You know, the auto scaling approach, you're going to consume more from your cloud provider during that fourth quarter, and we'd encourage you to limit your reservations. I mean, this kind of gets to nuance around cloud provider. One of the things I really like about Google, and I wish Amazon would really go here too, is that Google bakes in the price. So if you run an instance for the full 730 hours in a month, you don't have to make a long-term commitment. You just get that discount. They throw you the discount at the end of the month because you used it. And, you know, with Amazon, you're forced into this weird kind of arbitrage model. You got to figure out like what am I actually going to use?
With the reserved instances.
Yeah, because you have to commit to a year. You're not paying anything up front. You're just committing to that reservation for the year. And it can be a challenge, right? So customers play that game of trying to predict like when they're going to grow and how, and then, well, can I have the aftermarket and get shorter terms? I just don't know. I think, yeah, so it's kind of walking around a lot there, but I think that flexibility in capacity, right? I mean, all my merchants, they're, you know, not the majority. Yeah, the summer's a lean time. You want to run as small as possible during the summer. Do your experimentation, get yourself ready, the personalization, get it dialed in for fourth quarter, and yeah, and then scale it out and go.
And do you guys, you mentioned that as a SaaS platform, you guys are identifying issues, things to optimize and notifying them. Would you notify me, let's say as a customer, if let's say I'm underutilizing and I really should be downscaling? Is that something you guys look for?
Yeah, we monitor all the instances for our customers. We monitor them fairly closely and pay. It's a thing, right? I mean, that's the thing is that in the summertime that the topic is going to come up from them is, hey, you know, how do I spend less and where can I cut back or trim? And so actually paying attention to their spend, it's a big deal, and you have to do it, especially if you know what I like around that model where. For us as a SaaS platform, you own your cloud account and you invite us into that cloud account. You know, to the extent that I can give you more insight and help you get more efficiency and better utilization out of that cloud account. I mean, it's a win for us. It helps our customer. They're happy. So,
got it. And then Eric, what's your guys' approach on that?
What's the question?
So the question was,
yeah, right.
I kind of got lost.
Yeah, the question was pricing. I mean, you've already talked about your pricing. It's session based. So the question was,
it scales with demand, right?
You guys scale with demand. So that's the benefit.
Concept of that. Like it just works. It handles the load. The way it's set up to scale, it's very quick. It's very efficient. We don't need to predict anything. We just do it. And the pricing is flat. So you know exactly what it's going to be. Now we do have discounts. If you come in and you've got 1 million or 1 billion sessions, we will work with you on pricing. So it doesn't doesn't stay flat across, millions of sessions. We do offer discounts, but we
Gotcha.
publish the pricing
That's
on
good
our
to know.
site because that's what works for most people, and we like to be public about pricing.
Right.
But we can do discounts at the higher levels for sure. But it's a
Yeah.
set cost. Like, what that's going to be. You know what you're going to pay, and you can put that into your financial models, which is really our whole thing. Like, we abstract all these details, so you just forget about it. It just works.
Yeah. No, I'm also a fan of public pricing, and that's some, certain segments of the market are familiar with enterprise pricing workflows and things like that. But just yesterday, I was looking at some solution and I couldn't find the pricing. So instead of signing up, I just tweeted, "Does anybody know what the price is for this thing?" But we started to talk about this, and I think it's really interesting is the difference between Eric, you guys all in on AWS, and Jay, you guys being sort of multi-cloud with AWS, Google, and then some other providers. And it seems like, the benefit, I'm assuming, to being all in on AWS is you can really optimize for it and tune for it, and maybe take advantage of some things that aren't available with all the clouds. Eric, maybe you can jump into some specifics there, and we can see what Webscale supports in that regard. And then, of course, it's really cool, Jay, to be able to say, hey, Amazon's down, which has happened from time to time, and we all notice those those situations. You can just fail right over to Google. But on the other hand, maybe that's a little bit more of a rare event. Do I really want to pay a price for that on an ongoing
and
basis?
it's also a little bit unfair. I don't think we've seen necessarily system-wide Amazon outage. There were some console issues that affected everybody. They have happened, but generally speaking, you see an availability zone and Amazon have a challenge. So
right, totally. So maybe Jay, we'll start with you on that.
Sure.
How do you guys fully, like, are there any cases where you're making trade-offs where you're not fully optimizing, utilizing everything you can in AWS?
No, I would say this.
There?
So some of the things we're helping our customers minimize the price of infrastructure. We find that when they're buying Amazon services, there's always a premium on top of that instance that backs it up. So if you can give them software configured solution that's the same, that gets them that same performance availability characteristic, but doesn't come with that hourly price premium, I think that's the benefit we find to it. And then the reason I think we end up there is mainly because we do support AWS and GCP simultaneously, as well as CenturyLink and others too. So in that stance, yeah, that's kind of our take on it. Is we like to have it all under our control. So yeah, if you did have an issue, or you decided one day you don't like Amazon, and it's weird, the only comments I ever hear from a customer is anybody but Amazon, where for some reason some customers do feel that they're in competition with Amazon.
AWS.
Yeah, right. Anybody but AWS. And so then we're like, all right, yeah, well, here's these other choices out there, and you tell us, we'll meet you where you're at.
Got it. Eric, what are your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I mean, we pretty much went all in AWS. We're deeply integrated and make use of their services. We know their systems really, really well. We've spent a lot of time with their engineers, even their Aurora engineers. I've been on video calls with them, and the guys who write the engine, custom tuned Aurora engine and different parts of AWS. I've worked with them to solve a lot of issues on their infrastructure, even recently. So again, it's our approach to Magento. Like, we focus on one thing, we do it really well. We focus on one cloud provider, we know it really well.
Right. And so are there, like, Eric, if you were to go into some specifics, like some specific things that maybe, you guys have been able to do by virtue of going all in on AWS that perhaps, Webscale might not be touching because it just doesn't make sense for them to deal with? Eric, that's a question for you.
Yeah. I think if you want to be cloud agnostic, if you want to do the multi-cloud failover, if you want to do a lot of customizations, Webscale makes a lot of sense. If you're 80% of Magento store owners, and you don't have any strange requirements, and we fit your requirements, I think we're probably a good fit. But again, we're not right for everybody. And
right, but like, are there specific implementation details of your AWS infrastructure that you suspect, like, they might not support, like specific services you're using, or?
We have support for most services. I think if you want to do things like you want to set up multiple Redis servers, you want to do multiple Redis containers, that's something we don't do. We have a certain set, and that's what we provide. Again, if you fit into that, that works really well. Joel mentioned something earlier about dedicated IP addresses. We have seen some instances where people need to whitelist an outbound IP address for a connection, which on Stratus can change because your containers are floating across the Stratus grid. So we're gonna roll out a feature where we can route you through a specific gateway to do that. But as of right now, if you absolutely needed that, that would be something that's not a good fit. But you can talk to our support or our sales guys, and they'll let you know. Other than that, no, I don't think so.
Okay. I would have thought there would have been more things you'd have to say about ways you've optimized AWS that a vendor that isn't solely focused on AWS
sorry. I
optimized it.
thought you were asking for things that would like differentiate us, that would be like blockers from using us.
No, other way around, yeah.
No, we've done a lot. Like we know the AWS instances really, really well. We know things under NDA that I can't discuss publicly, that we've worked with them, that is knowledge that people just wouldn't have, even especially with Aurora. Like I can say things like, if you look at Aurora and you go back through, look at the release notes, every release has 1, 3, maybe even 4 Aurora restart bug fixes in it. Like, we know a lot about all of those issues with Aurora. And then optimization. So there's a lot of gotchas. There's a lot of gotchas with technical challenges that you'll face, but then there's a lot of optimizations, like how the instances work underneath with like the Nitro hypervisor. We just recently worked with AWS. They missed the driver. We found it. We worked with their team. And they mass deployed the driver. So to fix the way the CPU clocking is on some of the instances. So like that's things that people, like your own cloud account, like you wouldn't know any of that, or how to work with it, or the deep understanding of it that we do, because we focus only on AWS. But again, a lot of it I can't talk because it is under NDA.
Okay. And then Jay, do you guys get in, work pretty closely with AWS core team or the Google Cloud core team on optimizing infrastructure?
That's an interesting one. I think actually, because of how we do what we do, the need or where we run into, like, I won't necessarily run into any Aurora specific issues. I'm more of a MariaDB guy. So to that end, I mean, yeah, there's us and what we do in that regard. I think where we're big contributors around optimization, so we do a lot with PageSpeed contributing there. I think our focus is more around our SaaS platform and how it operates, as opposed to getting into the nuance of how a hypervisor works in Amazon, for example. I mean, these guys, it makes sense to me too, right? Like if I was building Stratus Cloud and I was gonna I'd pick a cloud vendor and focus on that cloud vendor and go deep to make sure that Stratus Cloud is gonna work, right? That it's not gonna have an issue that's surprised because you care a lot about that vendor all of a sudden because you're in that vendor. You've made that decision. You need to make it work. Whereas in our case, I mean, we're much more flexible in that, and that we'll, we do a lot with Google. We're close to Google for sure. We've done a lot with Amazon too. I mean, it's more of a application specific and building out the instances that we need and getting the technology and the details that we need set up correctly for our accounts. So.
Nice.
Can I add that I think you guys would work really well with Google Cloud Engine, because on AWS, if people are paying for their resources as they dynamically use them, they're paying on-demand pricing and they're not getting those discounts. Whereas on Google Cloud Engine, they would auto apply it. So I think they would work really well with Google Cloud Engine, Galen.
By the way, I just want to say, and Joel also mentioned this in the chat, I think you guys are keeping it super classy, and I really respect that. You're able to get in and have a pretty robust discussion of some of the differences, but also keep it perhaps classier than the previous stream.
That's not a high bar, man.
That's So Jay, real quick, follow-up question. We talked a bit about your failover with AWS and Google App Engine. Question from Joshua to just sort of flesh out how does that work exactly? Are you replicating across clouds?
We are. We are. That's exactly how that's working. So we're replicating data. Those data restrictions around the SLA for DR. That's what that's about. We're replicating data from one cloud provider to the other, and then managing the code and deploy across cloud providers as well. So
nice. All right, so let's get into deployments. That's been a topic that I got a bunch of different questions about. So, how do you guys?
Gets back to your M2 cloud.
That's what I was just thinking. That's what I was just thinking. So, how do you guys handle deployments generally? And then I got a couple specific drill-in questions. Jay, maybe we'll start with you real quick. And again,
sure.
if you want to talk about perhaps critique, anything with how Magento Cloud handles deployments as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think it gets back to, I mentioned it previously. So early in our life, when we migrating Magento kind of the traditional way. So you're moving from an on-prem or a hardware deployment in some hosting vendor into the cloud. So you're re-architecting on the fly. So you can't forklift. But then what you needed and what was really missing in the world was all of the various instance management tools. We settled on Chef Solo as the configuration management of choice. I like it because it can be serverless, but it operates within the auto provisioning system that we built. So essentially what we've got is two pieces. There's the one piece that needs to work with that cloud vendor, use their APIs to deploy the VPC the way it needs to be set up, all the firewalls, get us the instances, and then utilizing configuration management, so Chef Solo in particular, to configure the software on each one of those instances that we would create so that it becomes a Magento storefront. And so our input is your GitHub, your database dump, and your static assets. And then with that, public, private keys, all that kind of stuff too. But then with all that data, it's essentially captured as a software declaration that's managed under source control, push button deploy into that cloud vendor, and then testing starts. And I think that automation and the process that surrounds that, so for us, is a very controlled process from kickoff call to go live that you have to walk through. And we've done it so many times now that that automated process, along with the manual pieces of the testing and the validation, and then fielding your requirements back to us as things change or you find defects or what have you, that process being baked in and very repeatable is a requirement. It's kind of table stakes. If you can't do that, you're not going to have a successful client launch. And I think, to the M2, I think that's the problem, right? Is they weren't able to, they don't appear to have solved that onboarding problem of how do I sign a customer and then get them live in a repeatable, consistent way. And then Eric has solved it his way, which, it's impressive. In terms of their onboarding and being able to take, do the same kinds of things we do where you've got code data and then boom, system comes out. That you got to get to that level of automation. If you don't have it, it's kind of table stakes like auto scaling. Without that repeatable process, the flexibility of Magento will kill you because there's just so many variables and ways that things could be different. That means there's so many ways things can break. So in that regard, I think, probably you look at that as a kind of a delta. If your requirements are kind of esoteric, you got a weird ERP system someplace, you need a VPN here or there, we might be a better fit there. But if you look more like, which is kind of the bulk of if you look more at a normal, it's kind of more standard, it's a typical N-tier approach that we're both going to succeed, or so I think it's kind of what are your requirements and how can you get the story you've been working so hard with your developer to build, how can you get that live in this environment to realize the benefit of the cloud? And I think we've solved that in different ways. Eric's team and my team have solved it in different ways, but the end result's the same. It's this automated, repeatable approach to code data comes on, live in production with a finite known amount of time, vetted, know it's going to work as soon as you light it up. So without that, you're in trouble.
Eric, want to pass to you and want to also mention, Alan McGregor in the chat said he hasn't seen any issues whatsoever with deployments. I was talking to somebody recently who's running into some issues with a bug in deployment. I don't know the specifics of it, so I do want to be careful. Oh my God. I'm done, you guys. Why does that mean sarcasm? I don't even understand that. I'm done. I'm going home. I'm going to the pool. All right, forget that. I'm an idiot. Eric, so let me pass to you and get your thoughts on that one.
We see people doing deployments every which way you can imagine. I think the most common is probably Capistrano, where they symlink, they do blue-green deployments that way. The fly in the ointment here with M2 is database upgrades. I'm sorry, I'm watching the chat. Database upgrades, and that's the big question. So I think it's in what 2.2 or 2.3. There's a flag where you can see if there's going to be a database upgrade triggered, and then how do you communicate? How do you set the flag, the maintenance flag, and when do you take the maintenance flag out? So what we're working on is trying to create a system of Rails that Magento 2 users can use to do deployments. So in Stratus 3.0, which I've talked about, we have the ability to create your own dev instances. So you create your own instances, which are essentially full clones of quote unquote the server, which is a set of containers essentially in the database, and the server configuration. So what we want to do is we want to allow people to connect their Git repositories and set up a set of actions. So we're kind of building the framework for our own continuous delivery pipeline, where you can run all your tests, you can run your deployment commands, and you can push those into the Stratus infrastructure, so that we then keep the code in the container. So when we deploy, instead of just pushing out over SFTP or Fabric to multiple web nodes, you just deploy it to one place in Stratus. Stratus recompiles the containers, brings up the new set of instances, pauses the traffic, routes the traffic over once they're out, drains the connections. And again, the fly in the ointment is, what do we do when there's a database upgrade? So that's something we're testing now. Invicta, and I think it was Invicta, published a really, really good article where they're doing close to zero downtime deployments, and they integrated a utility called, I think it's called Finks, and they wrote a Magento module to handle that, and I think it revolves around the declarative schema, which the guys in the chat are probably much more knowledgeable about this than me. But there is work on that where you can do it in a declarative way for the schema changes. So that's the question. Everybody says, even Magento Cloud says they have zero downtime deployment. No, they don't. Like, if you have database updates, like, nobody has really, I don't think, figured out how to do that seamlessly yet.
Got it. In terms of one of the questions I got was around rollbacks. How do you guys handle rollbacks, particularly around data? Well, Jay, we'll start with you.
Sure, we bake it into our deployment process. So one of the things that we do, we haven't talked much about backup. So
oh, that's a good one too. Yeah.
Yeah. So on a regular basis, so what we're doing, we're snapshotting disks in all the different cloud providers. It's kind of we talked about it a lot, and we've added that as, before the only API we depend on is creating and destroying instances, and we've added the ability to snapshot disks to where I think it's important. It works for us. So with that, what we do when we do a deployment, we're snapshotting the system before the deployment begins. And then if you run into an issue, it's an automated rollback process. So you can revert to what happened, the state you were in prior. When we do that, it's really, coordinating that, meeting the developer where they're at, and helping them fit within that process to make sure that they have that rollback position to recover from whatever they've done. The backups is a huge issue. I mean, it still astounds me that there's things like mass customer delete as an API call in Magento. It seems ridiculous to me. I've had
where'd all my products go?
Yeah, right. I've had customers call say, we saw something and we didn't like this user, and we accidentally dropped all of our customers. And then there's like moment of panic, and they call us. Now what do we do? It's like, well, good thing we back everything up. So, all right, we'll set about and we restore the system back to the state it was leading up to that mass customer delete call, right? So kind of like you scratch your head, like, why do I need that function in production? I don't know. But yeah, okay. So it puts the onus on us to make sure that we've got a recovery plan when somebody breaks something,
Yeah. Got it. Eric?
Yeah, it's the same thing. Part of the deployment process, we snapshot the files in the database, server configuration as well, and then we try to detect for failures, because we do allow you to build your own deployment pipeline in Stratus 3, and then we will roll back. So you can select if you want to automatically roll back or you want to manually roll back. Automated rollback and catching the errors is the default. But yeah, it's snapshotting the database and snapshotting the files. And
So
being
then
able to do that quickly is the key.
yeah, that's the next question was going to be, how fast is that rollback generally?
Our rollback, it can be as part of that deployment, and it's as fast as you can instantiate the disk and attach it and replace it. So the recovery from the people problems is the harder one, right? When somebody deletes all their customers, there's usually a fear factor where they don't want to get fired, so they're like holding off telling the boss that, hey, we just deleted all the customers and we need to go recover now. So that's where you see there can be data loss for the customer in that scenario, because they're just not being proactive or, you know, open about, oh my God, we just deleted everybody. And so you know, in those situations, you do the best you can, right? You can recover the data up until they hit mass customer delete, but anything that occurred after that becomes this painful process to try and recover.
Right.
But
orders, man, if they get orders after that,
I know,
like,
right?
well,
Well, yeah,
do you get emails? Do you get copied on the emails? Because you're going to need to recreate.
Yeah, exactly. Go recover. Good luck. You know, I'll do what I can.
Eric, and so Erica, how fast is yours? And I don't know exactly how long it takes to spin up instances. I know that can be immediate, or maybe in certain cases it takes minutes.
It varies by cloud provider quite a bit.
Yeah,
actually.
and 2.9, for us, it's really, really fast. And this is why one of the reasons we went back and did a pretty big re-architecture and re-engineering was in order to be able to do really, really quick snapshots, especially with MySQL. I mentioned earlier being able to make copies of instances. You can save them, you can reload them, you can refresh them. And we did a lot of engineering under the hood to be able to do that, which primarily just revolves around the file system, being able to snapshot it, being able to prepare MySQL for the snapshots, and being able to mount those quickly. So we're not actually like unmounting disks and remounting disks or things like that. We're working based off of snapshots and ZFS.
Okay. Okay. Nice. So it sounds like maybe that's a little faster than if you're having to.
It's the fastest I've seen in our testing by far.
Okay.
By far.
So just again, I'm going to ask the dumb questions here. Are we talking minutes, seconds in each of these two scenarios? Eric,
we did 100 gigs in milliseconds. Put it that way. We did
milliseconds to seconds is the way.
And then Jay, are you guys in the minutes
category
or? Oh, okay. Okay, cool. All right. Make that simple for me to understand. And then one of the question I got was like around having separate testing environment, let's say per branch. I think Eric, you talked a little bit about this, but for developers that, you know, one guy I talked to was like, hey, we're not replicating our testing environments locally. They're too complex. So they want to be able to spin up a test environment for each branch that they're working on a feature in. Is that something that you guys support, Jay?
Oh, yeah. Actually, I mean, it's very similar in the sense that you can get there with containers, but snapshotting and imaging and then building containers, deploying containers there. With the way we do it, because of how we auto provision, it's very straightforward for us to copy the production system and spin up, create a staging system from that. So that deployment process, so basically take your production, and I totally agree. I mean, when you think about, I'm going to execute a major change on my website, the most important thing you can do is to test that change, test that deployment process in a copy of the production system, that you're not going to break anything live in production. So you're not touching production until you copy production, you test your deployment process, you vet that this is working, it's going to go smoothly, then you go do it in production. So you know that, I mean, one, if it is that database change that you need a maintenance window to deploy, that it's going to be as short as possible. And the biggest thing is that you just know what's going to happen before you try it. Don't put your site at risk. You know, basically test everything as often as you can. And, you know, the one thing that I find a challenge is that a lot of the smaller merchants, they won't have a regression test plan, right? So they have this understanding of, yeah, I got this new feature, I know what I'm changing, and they may test or understand that, but then without that regression test plan, they have no way to say, have they regressed in the normal functionality of their site, right? So more testing, you can't stress enough. How do you make sure that what worked yesterday is still going to work tomorrow and go?
Yeah.
So.
Nice. And then Eric, you think you touched on this already, but you guys have some functionality around that?
Yeah. Now that 2.9 is coming out Monday, we can move to 3.0 and release the self-service. You basically create your own copy of the server. You can create your own clones, and then you can save them, you can reload them, you can diff them. And we want to extend that further down to the local development environment. Like, our goal is to replace the local development environment entirely, where you're still working on local files, but everything is connected to the Stratus instances in our cloud. And that allows us to make sure that you're working on exactly what you're going to see in production. When you develop on Stratus, you're developing in an exact replica of what the configuration is going to be when you do deploy. And then we have tools that allow you to push up through your development, into your staging, into your user acceptance testing, and then into production.
Beautiful. Oh, that's awesome. Well, hey, I know we're a bit over our time. Any last topics that we want to cover before we wrap up here, Jay? I'll start with you. If there's any questions I didn't ask that I should have, anything else you want to highlight before we get ready to land this baby?
I guess I would highlight that, when you're picking a vendor, be it anybody, I don't care, of hosting, your partners that you're going to work with that are really responsible for delivering your site, making sure that your revenue, you get the most out of your business. It's really, you can't pay enough attention to the team that you're going to work with and understand, are they a good fit for you? And I think what Eric and I could definitely agree on is, like, yeah, there are nuances of our services that are a little bit different, ways in which you might consider we're better or worse, or they're better or worse, what have you. But it really comes down to understanding that team and what the team's focused on, the direction they're pointed in. Does it strongly align with your business? And is that team on the other side people that you can work with, that you're going to get the most out of them, and that they can hear you and they hear your requirements and actually can deliver on it. I think, it's huge. I see it with our customer base as they switch system integrators, from one, partner to another partner, or, finding that group that's going to work for them and help them get the most out of their site. I think that human element, I think we overlook it a lot, and it's a big deal because, at the end of the day, we're all, both companies are very motivated by our customer success, and we're dedicated to our customer. We do everything we can to satisfy their needs and help them. And so, it's really about finding that group that's going to do everything they can to help you the way you need to be helped, right? So, for what it's worth. That's
awesome. Eric?
Oh, it's a good summary. Just find the people that you're more comfortable working with, and try to get a trial set up, and or at least a 30-day money back, and go test some different people out and work with them, and make sure that you just talk to their sales team in the beginning and flesh out any specific requirements you may have, and then just choose what's right for you. Like, we're not right for everybody, and I don't think any one host is right for anybody. I just don't use Magento Cloud.
Yeah, I was thinking,
is Ben still here? That's a joke for you, Ben.
Great way to end it. Though, thanks both you guys again. Really appreciate having you guys, and again keeping it classy, and also really kind of getting into your some things that you differed on. So thanks both of you again. Thanks everybody for tuning in and for all the great questions. And you guys will be able to watch this on the stream on YouTube after this is done. And hey, thanks. If you're looking for a Magento developer, check out commercehero.io. All right, talk to you later. Bye.